Hey everybody, we are back. It is Jack Murphy, and you are on the Jack Murphy Live podcast, the flagship podcast of the Liminal Order. And today I have a wonderful guest. Very excited to talk about. This guy is truly world-class leading expert in artificial intelligence. We had a very interesting way that we came together and learning about his new software and his work. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you my new friend, Nick Cassimatis. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Jack. Thanks for having me on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure. And Nick, the main thrust of these podcasts is that I really want to just try to help guys get a better understanding of the world around them today. And artificial intelligence and computer science, obviously, very important issue for us moving forward into the future. My guys in the Liminal Order are very focused on the way technology impacts the way that we organize community. Technology impacts the way that we communicate. We're all very focused on the way technology impacts our way to even learn and have ideas, or even an understanding of who we are as humans and what tribes and our social affiliations we have. So this is something that fits right in theme with the larger overarching themes of the podcast, but it is going to be probably a little bit more technical, a little nerdier than usual, which is fine with me. I love it, and I know the audience is willing to go for it too. So, and in contrast to Eric Weinstein's Portal podcast, where he says, if anybody gets left behind, so be it. Forget them. They don't want to dumb anything down or go into basics. I think we're going to take the opposite approach here. And while you are, and I'll have you explain your background, eminently qualified to discuss the finest details of this subject matter. My goal here is to have a conversation that is going to be digestible and useful and informative for most people who aren't experts, but certainly are bringing with them a fair amount of intellectual firepower for understanding and processing this stuff. So with that in mind, let's just get started. I mean, we were introduced through a mutual associate a few months ago. And I got to be honest, when we set up to have a phone call, and I just had the phone call with you, and then afterwards went back and started researching your background. And I'm glad that I did that in that order, because I would have been a little nervous, I think, to talk to you, because you have a very impressive background and pedigree. Maybe you could just start off by sharing with people a little bit about where you came from, generally speaking, and what sort of brought you to this point today. I mean, that's a big question, but you know what I mean.
Sure. I guess briefly, I was, coming up basically when the first personal computer revolution, when AI actually had its, a burst of popularity at that time. And I decided to become an artificial intelligence researcher. I was a professor in the field for about 9 years.
Where did you study artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
What is that? Is that a degree? Do you go to college and be like, I want to get an artificial intelligence degree?
At the time, no. I did my undergrad at MIT in math, just to give me a lot of flexibility to learn because the thing about artificial intelligence is that it's, if you just study the AI stuff out of computer science, you're going to be pretty narrow but it really touches on linguistics, psychology, philosophy. And so just the way
science, yeah.
Things were at MIT, it was best to do a math major because that gave you the flexibility to take a lot of these other classes as well. So did that. Then I decided, believe it or not, that I wanted to make computers learn.
That's a good place to start. What does that mean? And that's a question I really have. I hear this machine learning. I don't even know what it means. How do you make a computer learn stuff?
Right. That's actually a really good, deep question, actually, because it's what people call machine learning right now. Actually, technically it is learning. I mean, basically, the computer starts out being able to do very little, then it can do more. So you can call that learning, I guess. The difference is the way machine learning is done today. Mostly, is it's really deep down, basically a lot of memorization and pattern recognition. So, for example, if you want to have a computer learn, what faces look like, for example, recognize faces and so forth, you just show it a billion faces, and it starts to sort of maybe get some patterns.
So that like the joke about the CAPTCHA stuff being us teaching computers how to pick up stoplights and doors and cars and stuff, that's not actually a joke, or maybe they're using that system, but there's really like just human manual interaction to help teach the computer what it is. And then also back this up for me a little bit. My experience in programming is with BASIC, okay, when I was a kid. And it was very simple, line 10, input this, line 20, if then. And like the computer program itself didn't write anything or remember anything. So I'm confused about how you teach it. Does it begin writing its own code? Like what
Yeah.
happens there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's funny, by the way. Basic was my first language too. And let's see. So take the capture. That's a good example. So even something simple like recognizing letters and numbers and so forth. Basically, it's hard to sort of describe in a nutshell without getting technical, very technical. But in a nutshell, what you do is you show it a bunch of letters. Say if you want it to recognize letters, and then it tries to figure out sort of actually let me think of let me think of an easier example. Let's say you want to detect strawberries, right? Because and this is one of the earlier problems in artificial intelligence. Back decades ago, because you want to sort strawberries from something else, right? Because you have some automated sort of industrial process or agricultural process. You show it a bunch of pictures of strawberries, and so part of the thing you get in a picture is what colors do you see? Do you see a lot of red? Then there's a lot of other things like, do you see a lot of curves, because strawberries are curved rather than square and so forth. So you get sets of properties that you input to the computer. And then basically you see tons of these things. And over time you say, oh, well, and then you tell it, well, these are strawberries, these are not strawberries. And a person has to sort of sit there and say, this is a strawberry, that's not a strawberry. And then the computer figures out, well, geez, in 95% of the, 99% of the cases when there's a strawberry, it's red. And it figures out, well, basically the sound in the background basically doesn't really matter whether something's a strawberry or not. 50%, if there's basically it's through tons of data, it tries to figure out which features correlate the most with whether something is a strawberry or not, or whatever you're trying to learn. So that's a classic way of doing machine learning. And the slightly more modern way is that there's slightly more complicated techniques for figuring out which features are relevant, which aren't. But that's really what a huge amount of machine learning is, and it's really. Everybody thinks there's a lot of really magic going on where people are writing their own programs, or people are doing all kinds of, or computers are doing all kinds of really smart things. That's really all they are. They're glorified tabulations of statistics that they use to, in a lot of cases, make predictions and classifications.
So am I getting this right, that like the power of artificial intelligence is driven by a human clicking on certain things?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the biggest challenges and expenses in a lot of machine learning projects is getting the data that a human annotates. So, if you need 100,000 faces to train a face recognition system, you need to find a way to sort of label those faces, label those pictures.
That sounds like a severely limiting factor.
It is, yeah. And there are whole startups that sort of try to help somewhat automate that or make it cheaper, or like have banks of people who like Mechanical. I don't know if you're familiar with Mechanical Turk. It's this Amazon process. It's an Amazon sort of subsidiary where they literally have people that you can outsource these kinds of processes to, and basically where you basically send them 1,000 pictures. They'll send these pictures to 1,000 people over the world. You pay them $10, per hour or whatever it is, to label these pictures. So it's a real limiting factor, both in expense and time and so forth. Yeah.
There's some really deep irony in that, actually, if you think about it. This quest to create, I think, what you call a human level artificial intelligence involves, in some degree, the most manual of physical human labor possible at this point.
Oh, yeah, that is true. Yeah, it's like almost like a sweatshop for AI, basically. Yeah,
that is wild. And so when you say that they learn stuff, it does, like, the file size of whatever this program is it continuously growing as it like learns and becomes accustomed? Is it writing and expanding itself? Like if you sit there and watch it, and I'm a layman, I don't know any of this stuff. Do the lines of code increase as the file size get bigger or whatever as it begins to learn more and more?
Way to think about it is think of a lot of these systems as like, you think of like a wiring diagram in electronics. And so usually these, what they're called models, are fairly they're fairly static. They don't change a lot. So the wire, you don't add new wires. I mean, in some advanced methods you do sometimes, but generally what everybody's using, what you hear about, you don't. You basically start with a bunch of wires in your diagram, and basically all you really are learning is for every wire, in the diagram, there's like a number of how much current to put through there. And so really all these things are really doing is based on the data adjusting the current.
Okay.
Those numbers on the wires. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So I'm having visions. I've watched Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've watched that show. I have a couple of friends who are actually in the heart of the beast, and they say that the show is pretty realistic and like the characters are based on people in real life. But I'm just remembering this one episode where one of the guys creates an app that's supposed to be able to identify certain foods or something, but it turns out all it can identify is hot dogs or sausages because it was all based on dick pics or something like that. I can't get past this extreme irony of that. In order to create the most advanced piece of technology we've ever seen, it's going to involve people in sweatshops just being like, hot dog yes, hot dog no, hot dog yes, hot dog no, added up over how many instances, over how many times, for how long. Knowing the fallibility of humans in general, what are the odds you think that we roll up massive human error into this big project? Because I'm just starting to see, just from the ground up all the way up, it seems like there's so many opportunities for something really fucked up to happen. So like, for example, in the limo order, we've got guys who are in Silicon Valley, and we just did this thing loosely called computer literacy, but it's much deeper than that. But it was basically to understand how computers work. And one of the big things I took away from it is that a computer basically is just going to go from A to B. You got to tell it to go from A to B, and then it makes a decision. It goes from B to C, and it's just a pathway of decision makings. But like, we're telling it what decisions to make. There seems like so many opportunities for human error, and it seems like these things will become compounded and increase in scope and size and problems. I mean, is that a fundamental issue that you guys are dealing with, or is that something that's been solved already, or what does that mean for the future? I mean, I cannot get over how much human involvement is there trying to teach a computer on how to be bigger, better, and smarter than we are.
Yeah, it's an issue. I mean, one example would be sort of, Facebook, Google, all these companies, they automatically filter out sort of a lot of content on their platforms to detect hate speech, for example, would be one example, and obscenities and things like that. Well, I mean, they're basically trained to do that by people, and people are telling them. In the way that's done is you get lots of examples of text, and this is hate, that's not, et cetera. And so basically, you're building in the bias of the person who's actually training it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is more talk about that. And in the field, are people doing much about it? I don't know, to tell you the truth, because I don't know really what you can do about it from sort of an AI from an algorithmic point of view. It's tough because you rely so heavily on these people. The best thing you can do is try to like instruct the people. In some way, you have to train the people to be better trainers. But it's a problem. And there's no real obvious solution.
And this is something people are working on. And is this in the literature? Is this like a known? I mean, I didn't just discover this in talking to you in 12 minutes.
It's something people talk about a lot, and basically, I don't think if you go like to an academic conference on AI, you're going to see a lot of sort of methods for this. But it's definitely people talk about it in sort of the blogosphere or whatever, or social media and so forth, and there are meetups about this. But people see it as a problem, and in some ways, it's a little bit overhyped of a problem. Sometimes, basically, the world is biased, and so basically, it's not surprising that AI would be a little bit biased as well in some ways. And so that's it's a problem people are starting to think about, and work on.
So I mean, jumping really far down the line here. Ultimately, when you use this phrase, human level artificial intelligence,
right.
One day the artificial intelligence, they're going to be human like, and that they're even take with us our own human flaws.
That's a good question. So first off, I do think it is possible someday for computers to be as smart as people. But I think like all the people right now saying that's about to happen and we really need to worry about that, I think they're way off base. That basically the stuff that's happening in AI right now is nowhere close to taking us to that level. And it seems like there's a lot of new stuff happening in AI, but there really isn't. What's really happening is there's a lot of old stuff that wasn't artificial intelligence that is being rebranded as artificial intelligence. So like all these, you might remember or not, 5 or 10 years ago, there was a lot of hype about big data. And you kept hearing about that. So all of that stuff now is being called AI. And so so it's really just a lot of rebranding that even though the hype has increased by say 1,000%, literally, the actual stuff in AI hasn't increased by that much.
What do you attribute that to? So, for example, there's discussions. I listened to Peter Thiel, somebody I think that you've had experience with. I've listened to him talk about how there hasn't been any advances in certain fields, and he's very troubled by that. And in fact, he's making the argument that we're in a period of technological stagnation. Eric Weinstein, his name come up again. He's making sort of the same argument in physics. And I think that that's something that we're being sort of misled by. We feel like we're living in this crazy age of innovation because you get a new iPhone every year and there's new fancy apps and updates and stuff. And all that's very interesting. But in terms of leaps and bounds and huge significant legs up, you're saying that the rate of acceleration in the development doesn't lead you to believe that we're going to hit, this human level anytime soon. What do you attribute the pace of change or innovation to within your field? Could it be higher? What's holding it back? What's the current status there?
I think there's a lot of stuff. I mean, overall, just generalizing just from AI, but to a lot of fields, I think, if you look at what's happened in science, this is the first time in history where you can make a good living being a scientist. And I think what's happened is become professionalized. So if you, up until, I don't know what the date is, if you look at like World War II, right after World War II, there was a lot of science funding that was science funding for the first time started really being put into the economy from the government. And so up until then, up until maybe the 50s and the 60s even, or the 70s, it was just something you did if you were a nerd, you were earnest about it. And it was basically a bunch of nerds in science who were organizing themselves. And so that had some downsides, but it had the upside, which is that you were actually doing sort of fairly real science. I think as it became more professionalized, as there was more money into it, basically it got taken over by base professionals in a bad sense. So basically the people running the field are the people who are really good at raising funding, and the skills it takes to raise funding are completely the opposite skills that it takes to make scientific innovation. And so I think that's part of it. It's become institutionalized. So in most institutions don't stay vital and productive for decades and decades and decades. Like the classic example of that is if you look at the Dow, the companies in the Dow index, I think maybe 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know what the right number is, or have been there for the last 100 years. All the rest of them have changed. But if you look at sort of a lot of top schools, a lot of top institutions, they haven't changed in decades. And so I think that's part of it. I think within artificial intelligence, I think there is this almost religion about this machine learning and data and so forth, where you have to use all this data and you can't actually see all these people doing machine learning are telling themselves, well, actually, we're not actually telling our computers are just using data to sort of learn stuff. We're not actually programming the computers to do things. And so but in reality, what they're doing actually is having people train the computers using the data that they're training. But that's
no hot dog.
Yeah. But that religion basically is basically, I think, really a damper on AI, because that's really not how people think. Or, people don't need a billion sort of examples of things to learn almost anything.
Is that sentiment widely accepted in your industry? Or are you sort of a renegade voice on that matter? Or
no, it's pretty renegade. Yeah, I mean, there's
okay.
there's a lot of
that's how we like it around here.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So what is the orthodoxy that you're battling against that's stymieing innovation? And from what I've heard, a similar phrase that I've heard is de-risking of the market, right? These people want to maintain their funding and their career. They're called careerists in other circumstances. What is the dogma that you're fighting against as a renegade AI professional and academic?
Yeah, there's a couple things. On the one dogma is basically that you should be able to measure everything very precisely and quantitatively. So, if you want to advance a new AI method, the way you do that is you show that it's better than other AI methods on a data set that's already been accepted. So, for example, let's say there's a recognized data set for recognizing characters, right? CAPTCHA type stuff. And then the way you show your algorithm is better is by doing just as well on that. But if you, and that's the game people like to play. That's all of science, basically, all of engineering as well, or most of it. But the problem for that is if you want to do something really new that actually takes that does something much smarter than that, and there's no data set for that other people are working on, then basically you really can't even prove that what you're doing is good. It's really very difficult. In some sense, because the game is to like beat other people in data that already exist. You're kind of that data is like an anchor making you work on really boring sort of isolated problems. So an example.
What is your give an example and your solution to that.
Well, my last startup had a technology for understanding natural language, and so the problem was the natural language that understood was much more complicated, sort of than any other software could understand, and so we really couldn't measure it against existing data sets. So our solution was just to build it and have it work on real world problems, and hopefully that people would see the value of it through that. So. That's basically one solution, but it's brutal. Like, and if you want to, you can do that once your technology is easy enough to sort of good enough to get to that level. It's almost, that's like step 3. Step 1 and 2 are actually doing a lot of basic research, and that period is very difficult because no one really wants to support you or hire you during that period.
Right. You can be a professional scientist. You just can't do real professional scientist work.
Exactly.
Well, that is yet another irony that we've uncovered. So you mentioned your last startup, and believe me, I have a billion questions, but I want to put a narrative structure into this as well too. So you mentioned your last startup. I think that I have a lot of guys, myself included, are very intrigued at this idea of what it means to do a startup, get it funded, and bring it to fruition, and have it be something worthwhile. What was your experience? What was the name of the company? Where did you get started? Tell us a little bit about that, would you?
Sure. Yeah, I was a professor at the time, and we had developed some natural language understanding technology, and that just means the computer can understand English, not sort of basic, So, and yeah, it got to the point where I thought it was useful in the real world. So I founded a small little startup, and I hired 2 or 3 of my students total. And we built something. This was before Amazon Echo. So this was actually when people still didn't really, AI was really a hard sell. It was something called the AI winter. So it was really hard. Yeah, definitely. It's a huge burst of enthusiasm in AI in the 80s. And then a lot of promises were made there that weren't kept. And so during the 90s and the 2000s and the early 2010s, basically, it was AI winter. And that meant that it was a really unpopular thing to do. People told me not to do AI. It's going to be horrible for your career. And all kinds of things like that. And so it was brutal. And so but it was difficult explaining it to investors, basically. I'd show them, a really nice demo of, you'd say something like, I don't know, find me the last 3 emails I got from Jack that had a PDF in them. And, would go to Gmail and just find those 3 emails. Right. And the thing is, people would say, why would I want that? I really had a lot of trouble explaining why anybody would want it. But ultimately we were bought out by Yahoo. But about a year or 2 later, then the Echo comes out, and that was really the first real in natural language processing, the really first real success. where actual consumers wanted something. Because Siri, the first iterations of Siri, you might remember that back in 2012-ish, it fell, terrible. No one really wanted to use it. And it was sort of emphasized as a product for a while. So Echo comes out, changes the world, basically. Everybody wants to do AI, and things got easier. But before that, it was tough doing a startup.
That blows my mind that this idea of working towards human level artificial intelligence wasn't a super exciting or sexy field, and that there was an AI winter. What was that all about? How did that come? How was there an AI winter? I'd never even heard of this.
Yeah. Back in the 80s, for the most part, there were a lot of investment in AI. And this was mostly in the Northeast, mostly in Boston, probably emanating from MIT. I would guess a lot of it was. And there's a lot of money venture capitalists put into artificial intelligence. There was a lot of hype in the press about it. You can go back and look at Time magazine covers from the 80s, and you'll see basically that there are stories then about robots taking over the world, and all the fears people have now were actually being sort of expressed then. But basically, almost all of that, all those companies failed, and almost all of that hype sort of came to naught. And so people said, well, this was, we just got taken, it's overhyped. And so for literally and a lot of people got burned financially. And so for, 20-ish years, 25 years, whatever it was really tough to, no one really wanted to fund AI. And this was when actually, even within the field of artificial intelligence, the academic field went to this machine learning stuff because before that, people actually tried to make computers that could reason and think. And because that didn't turn out so well, they said, well, let's forget that. Let's have them learn on their own. Because we can't trust researchers to make them think. And so what they called learning was this really rote, fairly stupid sort of data-driven kind of learning. And that's sort of was the failure of that early part of AI led to this sort of machine learning sort of takeover of the field. And that all happened during that winter.
Interesting. And you think it was the Amazon Echo, Alexa? You think that was what got people back, sort of the wind under the sails here for AI? I mean, that seems like a interesting push-pull circumstance. Would you find that in other fields where like a very basic consumer product is actually going to excite academic development, research and development in the field? I guess so. It makes people feel like that there's a reason for moving forward, I suppose, huh?
That's a good question. I'm sure like back in Sputnik, for example, that wasn't a consumer product, but it was sort of, something happening in the world that basically probably sort of affected how much stuff was going on in academia around aerospace and physics and so forth, and satellite technology.
To what extent is the government involved in making this stuff happen? I had an associate who worked for DARPA, and I was amazed to learn all of the things that they were working on. To what extent is the government right now actively working and trying to push the field and fund specific projects and work in that way that the DARPA net did spill over into internet? Here we are talking over my laptop. Is there something like that in the works right now with the feds and various governments around the world?
Yeah, I mean, overall, from the 50s up until today, the government's been funding AI research. I would say, I don't know the actual numbers, but I would say up until the last 5 or 10 years, it's probably been the majority of it. Now, again, I don't know raw numbers, but now it seems like the center, and they were funding it through sort of academic, they were funding, professors to do, and their students in their labs to do AI research. I guess more recently, it seems like the center of gravity has moved more into sort of the Googles and the Facebooks and the large companies of the world. So government's been involved for a long time in AI. And
go ahead.
Well, you could look at something like the cruise missile, right? So, it's basically a very simple feedback mechanism. Like, am I going too far to the right, too far to the left, right? And it sort of adjusts. It seems very simple and basic now, but when technology was first sort of invented, it was sort of in this field of cybernetics, which was sort of this pre-AI type field. So there's a lot of things, like another example would be, you probably had a modem back in the day, where
300 baud, baby.
Yeah, there you go.
Started at the bottom. Now we're at the top.
There you go. Yeah. And you remember that it had a hiss in the beginning, right?
Yeah, of course,
and that was sort of like, there's a little bit of AI going on in there to sort of calibrate itself towards the acoustics of the telephone wire. And so that had a little bit of AI in it. And so long story short, there's a lot of, stuff through history that has involved some AI and a lot of it's been funded by the government.
It's a fax machine. Is that AI? Jeez.
Yeah.
A little bit, huh?
A little bit. Yeah.
I guess I will never look at the fax machine the same again now. Smart little guy with your hissing. I do remember, man, 300. I remember we went to 2400, 9600. These were heady times, man. When you had a 9600 and a 486 PC, man, you were just jamming along.
I remember that. My first computer was a PC Junior, and it had, I got upgraded to 640 kilobytes of memory. So that's like a fraction of a megabyte. And I had a disk drive just in memory, and I compiled all my programs in memory. And boy, I've never felt more satisfied in terms of computational power. I've never, that was the only time in my life where I felt I don't want more computational power.
Yeah, right. Yeah, back before we even knew what was possible. What do you? It's interesting. The AI seems to. You said there was the winter, and then there's been an uptick in activity, but now you're saying a lot of it's just repackaged, other stuff sold as AI for investors and to make people look good and whatever. But where is the cutting edge right now?
It's a good question.
If you keep saying that after my questions, I'm going to start to thinking that I'm getting good at this.
There you go. There you go. I would say basically, if you look in the history of fields, it depends what you mean by cutting edge. If you mean basically taking the existing stuff that's happening right now and making it sort of incrementally better, then that's happening everywhere. That is happening sort of in companies. It's happening in academia. If you mean, where is the stuff that's going to take the next leap forward? That's a significant leap. I think that's hard to predict. I think if you knew those things, then I don't know, they wouldn't be such giant leaps. And so I don't know if you know this paradigm stuff, and about T.S. Kuhn and paradigmatic science. There's a philosopher called T.S. Kuhn who looked in the history of science, and he said there's normal science, which is what people do every day, and then there's revolutionary science, which is Einstein and Newton, who like totally change how people think of stuff. And I think in some ways, AI, so the normal science and AI is happening in academia and industry, and some of it's good. The sort of revolutionary step that we need to go to the next level, I think that always, you can't predict that. It always comes out of left field.
Yeah. But please now make your prediction.
Sure.
Is it, what's limiting? Is it like human brain power or computational power? Like what's the roadblock? Like would I be right in assuming that we could take like everything that we have now, if we had infinite energy and infinite computational power to get to where we wanted to go? Or are we don't know even how to do that if we had infinite power and resources?
We don't know how to do even that. And because there used to be, 10, 20 years ago, these books, you'd say, well, boy, if we just had 10 times more power, they try to compute how much compute power was in the brain, right? And they'd say, how long is it before a computer can have that power? But now with things like Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, these online places where you can rent servers, there's no excuse anymore. Like anybody, like for an hour, can rent that kind of power. It's relatively affordable for a lot of companies and a lot of universities to have 1,000 giant sort of super fast workstations going all at once, which is probably more power, which is at least more power than anybody ever thought we would need for AI. So that's not the problem. The problem is it's what you said. It's basically human brain that somebody just needs to think of how to do it. I mean, if you look at Einstein's stuff, for example, there were 20, 30 years ago, there was nothing he did that relied on new cutting edge science. It took, all the data he used, all the important sort of results were decades. They were known for a while. It's just somebody needed to just sit down and think about it.
Do you think that we're in the weeds of evolution on this matter? So it seems slow, but in historical terms, if you scan up and you're like, oh, well, then it happened in 1985 and then 2005 and then 2025, people would be like, oh, that happened pretty quickly. Or is it actually really happening slowly? And especially in this age of seemingly ever increasing acceleration on all fronts, all around us, all the time. Um, are we just stuck in the weeds and it seems slow because watching the paint dry sucks, or in a historical sense, is it going to actually be something that took place quickly? I suppose on a cosmic time scale, it's happening
Yeah, really
pretty
fast. Yeah.
quickly, right? Yeah,
That's a good question. I guess if you look at, what was the distance between Einstein and Newton, right? Because one way of looking at physics is that, Newton had a revolution and then Einstein sort of had his next revolution. And I don't know, was that 300 years? I don't know, it was centuries. Let's put it that way.
yeah.
And so in that sense, things aren't going any slower than that. I guess the difference is we're used to progress in so many other things accelerating, and I don't think that the progress in maybe basic science has quite accelerated as fast.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's something systemic holding us back. If Peter Thiel and Weinstein are talking about physics and nuclear energy and computing and whatnot, that it's just not, we're just not making the huge leaps and bounds. I wonder if there's something broader based that's limiting our progress in this field, which again, on a cosmic time scale, is really happening in a blink
Yeah.
of an eye. But for us as impatient fuckers, it's taking forever.
Oh, I definitely think there's something systemic. I think honestly, the problem is paradoxically, there's too much funding for it. There's too much support for it because you pile in a lot of money and you just get a lot of people who chase money rather than actual people who are deep scientists who are going to do this stuff. And that changes the culture of everything. Different people become in charge of stuff. It becomes impossible. And then people are chasing money for short-term. There's all these short-term sort of things you can make progress on, like sorting strawberries. But the long-term sort of goals, no one really cares about that. So in a lot of ways, the money's a wet blanket. It really actually makes things worse.
Yeah, I think about the times in my life where I've made some of the biggest leaps and bounds, and it wasn't because I had everything that I wanted. it's
Yeah.
because I, it's because I had none of the things that I wanted or needed, and I had to make serious change. Is there anybody in the industry right now who sees things similarly to you, that's working to create a space where these wet blankets aren't a problem and maybe give you the freedom to think outside of the box a little bit more than would be if you were otherwise constrained by budgets and reporting and grants and research and that kind of stuff?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I know sort of individuals who have similar views on artificial intelligence, but is there anybody with some institutional clout who's trying to make this kind of a home for that? Not that I know of. I mean, there are people. So a very common pattern is you'll get a billionaire. Steve Allen was one who they'll fund an AI center. They'll take an AI center and they'll put a lot of money and they'll fund an AI center. But then the first thing they do is they go out and they hire someone who's sort of a already well-recognized leader in the field. And really what they come and do is they just come and you just really do normal science. You show up, they do what everybody else is doing. They might do it better than everybody else or better than average, but just their MO is that they just go get the best person in the field, who's recognized in the field. And what you really wind up doing is just doing more of the same.
Right. In one of your papers of yours that I read, which was one that you sent me as being for lay people, and that took me an hour to read it.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I got out of there that one of the issues that you've raised is that the scientific method isn't appropriate for AI research. Did I get that right? If so, could you expand on that? Tell me what the flaw is, because not everybody in the audience may be a scientist, but we all learn the scientific method. We understand question, hypothesis, test, fail, whatever, move forward. Did I get that right from your piece? And if so, what is a new scientific method, model of research or exploration that you see is necessary in your field?
Yeah, that is correct. Like you said, the scientific method, the sort of the caricature of it is that basically somebody forms a hypothesis, they have an experiment that tests the hypothesis, and they collect some data, and they see basically whether the hypothesis is confirmed or not. And the way this sort of plays out in artificial intelligence is that people love to see scientific papers that have nice charts with improvements and numbers in them, and so forth. And so, getting back to the strawberry sorter, basically what I can do is I can create a strawberry sorter and I can show it has 75% accuracy. And then I come along later and I had this new strawberry sorter and it has 78% accuracy. And that's a huge result. It makes my career. And I spend the rest of my life sort of getting students using that method to we do oranges and we push 78% to 81%. And that's intoxicating to sort of institutional, sort of normal engineers and scientists, because they constantly have some goal. They can measure it. It seems kind of objective. But it leads to this sort of short-term sort of focus on, relatively incremental, irrelevant sort of gains. And if you really wanted to do something that, say, couldn't sort of just sort strawberries, but actually, say, have a conversation about, which strawberries are better than others, and how would you make a strawberry milkshake or something like that, just to be, a little bit, eccentric about it. You couldn't even. That would be a big project. It would take several years to do that. And these other guys, every 6 months, they're making a strawberry sorter 0.5% faster, 0.5% or 0.5% more accurate. And so they're looking productive, because they're looking like what scientists are supposed to look like. Whereas you wind up in a corner, seem like you're just some loser basically who's not really doing anything that's really going to amount to anything. So it's that sort of. That's really one of the major that sort of view of what science is, and the sort of confidence people get from like short-term metrics and incremental results, I do think is a major sort of impediment to science, to development in AI. And it would have been in physics too, by the way. I mean, basically, Einstein didn't do any experiments. He didn't really collect a lot of fine-grained data or anything like that. He just did a lot of deep thinking, and came up with revolutionary theories. So that's basically, I think, why the scientific method, in a nutshell, sort of hurts things. I think the solution, in my mind, is what people ought to do is try to actually build machines, just find little microcosms, I call them. So what would be an example of this? And a little example is like, what if you could build like a 2-year-old? And if you think a 2-year-old can speak some very simple, language, they can learn a lot. They can solve little problems and so forth. And so build a simulated 2-year-old, and that's much harder than anybody thinks. But anyway, to pick something that what I call microcosm, sort of something that's a small example of what you really want. A 2-year-old has a lot of what we want in adult intelligence, just in its sort of a seed forms. And so trying to like projects like that would be good. But then even within that, there's a lot of sort of ways of screwing that up. So you could say, all right, building a 2-year-old, a lot of people say, well, let's build a robot that moves around in the world and basically can walk like a 2-year-old. And they'll spend millions of dollars and on sort of irrelevant details about exactly how they walk and how, building a robot. And so you really need to be smart about what exactly about a 2-year-old is it that's sort of different than sort of a 2-year-old sort of dog. And try to build that out and build a simulation that does that. So basically build simulated, really small intelligences, and grow from there. And the other thing about the 2-year-old example is very common in AI is to build non-integrated systems. So what you'll do is you'll build a strawberry sorter, or you'll build something that detects faces. But if you think of human sort of intelligence, it's super integrated. So like in this conversation, for example, right now, I'm recognizing, your gestures, your facial expressions using my vision. I'm recognizing your voice using sort of speech recognition. And I'm trying to understand what you're saying using reasoning and memory and knowledge and so forth. And it's all happening literally, it's integrated in a sub-second sort of time frame. And so you look at the 2-year-old can do all those things and learn and recognize faces and so forth. So that's the other thing I would urge is don't just build 2-year-old sort of speech recognition capability, but actually build a 2-year-old that can understand speech, that can make plans, that can solve problems, and that can recognize sort of faces and do those all at once. That's something that's not encouraged in the field that I would encourage as well.
Do you think that where's the best place for that to happen? To me, as you're talking about this sounds like tenured professorship academia place sounds like that might be the best place to happen. It sounds to me like the worst place for that to happen would be a place like Yahoo or something, for example. Like you ended up at Yahoo after you sold your startup.
Right.
Did you find that to be intellect? I can see you smiling.
Well, I'm not gonna sort of bash any company I work for, I guess.
No, of course.
But let me just generally say in general that it's tough to do in industry generally, because basically there's a lot of focus on immediate and short-term results.
Right.
And honestly, there's a history. If you take a bunch of PhDs and you put them in a corner and say, don't show me results for 5 years, they're not going to do anything for 5. I mean, that's just human nature.
4 years and 6 months in, they're like, all right, what are we really doing here? Yeah. That's human nature, which again, it just brings me back to some of the original stuff we were talking about. It's like, we are humans building this thing that we want to call human level artificial intelligence. I'm pretty damn sure it might end up looking like a human with all of its flaws. I put out a question on a tweet. I said, hey, I'm talking to an AI expert. What would you ask him? One of the questions I got back was very interesting, actually, was, is there value in neuroatypical humans? And if so, will there be value in neuroatypical AI, right? Like, should we create artificial intelligence that reflects the span of our neuro capabilities? And should we build like autistic artificial intelligence machines? I mean, these are some really fascinating questions, actually.
Yeah, they are. I mean, in some sense, all artificial intelligence machines today are autistic. They're really good at doing one thing and nothing else. So they're hyper autistic. And relating back to your first question about, AI and not our biases, but will it have our motivations and our flaws and so forth? I think a couple of things there. First off, the reason we have a lot of these flaws is because of evolution, basically. Basically, we're all here because our ancestors sort of did a genocide over the people in the next valley, right? We're all descended from war criminals in some sense. So, there's no reason why an AI, if an AI is designed, it doesn't necessarily need to have those problems. So I worry much more about, I think it's possible to design a benign AI. The real threat to me is people in charge of AIs. So you could have a nuclear weapon that's benign. It just sits there all day and doesn't do anything. It's really the person bombing someone with it is the problem. So
guns don't kill people.
Exactly. Yeah, it's people and so it's that same argument for AI. AI doesn't need to kill people. It's people who are going to kill people using AI. And so that's that. Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you here, but like this is one thing I kept coming back to as I was reading your work was, if we're trying to model human level in artificial intelligence, but I've talked to so many evolutionary psychologists recently that I'm convinced that we're only adapted to adapt, right? Like our brain exists so that we can stay alive and reproduce. And if we imbue an artificial intelligence with those same two characteristics of staying alive and reproducing, that sounds terrifying to me, right? Like, I don't want them to be human, because humans do things that aren't necessarily morally right, aren't economically right, seemingly irrational, because all we really are is finely tuned instruments on how to adapt and how to continue to exist. If we were to create an actual human intelligence, then that it would be its goal too, right? To just reproduce and to exist at all costs, basically.
I don't think you need to actually, I don't think that's necessary. I think you can create sort of something that's super smart, as smart as we are, can do all the things we can do, but has no desire to kill people or has no desire to do anything bad.
What about to exist?
Even that, I don't think, there are plenty of humans who don't have a desire to exist, right? I mean, every day there's a suicide, right? It's kind of morbid, but no, I think that's the desire to exist is like an outgrowth of our evolution. And I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary.
Is there a point in time in which this AI stuff gets programmed and set up to evolve on its own? And if so, would that not be a circumstance in which it would find its optimization in evolution rather than its optimization towards a specific goal?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I'm saying it's possible to sort of make AI that's benign, but you're definitely right. It's also possible to breed a super sort of intense, competitive, AI as well, if you want.
Yeah. And I guess the risk is that not all of the actors in this marketplace are going to be rational or have the same desired outcome as people working in a science lab or at MIT or whatever. Accelerationists, people who want to see the end of the world, nihilists without the constitution for suicide, but would rather do mass homicide, things like that. That to me seems to be like one of the more troubling issues. And I just keep thinking about, if they act like humans, we're fucked. We need them to be better than humans. We need them to be simpler than humans, and we need it to be more constrained, and with a goal of doing its goal rather than. But again, I come back. I hear this paperclip example. Like where you, for people who don't know, where you set up an AI whose job it is to make the most amount of paper clips possible, and instead of just like making the factory run as well as it can, it somehow figures how to take over the whole world to make as many paper clips as you possibly can. It seems like the opportunity for a fuck up along those lines, given how inclined we are to make mistakes as humans. Does this seem probabilistic? Does it seem somewhat inevitable, perhaps, that we would err, like just the actual error rather than a malicious one?
I agree. Yeah, no, I totally agree that that it is possible to have flaws like that. And yeah. So just because, yeah, definitely, I don't think I don't think there's anything inherent to sort of being conscious or intelligent that makes you malicious. But I definitely do believe that someone can make them be malicious, and that there are sort of unintended consequences sometimes. Where, like you said, if you tell a computer, hey, build the best paperclip factory, then sure, let me just kill all of Louisiana and make paper clips out of the raw materials or something like that. So that's definitely something that's something you should worry about. Frankly, though, I mean, I would worry much more about that's not going to happen anytime soon in our field. I mean, nuclear proliferation, of biowarfare, those are much more serious short-term existential risks.
Yeah, I was thinking the bio stuff and genetic stuff seems to be making progress enough that those types of ethical and existential worries seem to be much more relevant in those industries than here, where we can't even get the computer to tell me if that's a fucking stoplight or not at this point. So we're probably still some time away from that. I wanted to just take a total detour and talk about reality for a second.
Sure.
So we're creating these machines whose job it is to observe reality around them, right? What does that tell us about just reality itself? Like, is the existence of the computer, and we get 10 of them and we all sit them in the same room and they're supposed to scan up the room and tell us everything that's in there or whatnot. Are they all going to see it all the same way? Are they going to see things that we're not seeing? Is there going to be a unified version of what reality is because it's a machine deducing it from us versus all of us with our own bias and our own distractions and everything that we carry with us? What does it mean for like our understanding of a concrete objective reality where like this pen in my hand, this is it, this is all there is to it, but I can't see, there's like bacteria and shit all over it and whatever. And like, what are machines going to tell us about the nature of reality that we don't already know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a very simple first stab at that, which isn't so interesting, but sort of might be a decent example, is that in the earliest days of computer vision, making computers recognize the environment around them using light signals, people were shocked at basically what looks the same to you and me from looks totally different from like, if you look at me from this angle, I know where no one can see this, but then I turn 45 degrees, or I change the lighting a little bit, what people don't realize is that two pictures of the same thing that look very similar to us, if you actually did the computer, are vastly different. Little things like shadows and shading and the hues of the lights shining on them are vastly different. And it's just our brain sort of can cancel all that out and just see the essential stuff, and it makes them be the same. So that was one example where the history of the field, where looking at something through the prism of a computer made us see things that we wouldn't have seen on our own. And see differences that we wouldn't have seen on our own. Now the bigger, so I think actually, again, for someone who's intellectually earnest, not doesn't have an agenda, I think, seeing stuff through the prism of a computer can really make you more objective, because computers are objective. I mean, they don't have an agenda, and computers basically are very dumb, and so they belabor everything, and they make you sort of realize what your assumptions are. So there's all kinds of assumptions behind our conversation here, everything we say. I'll give you another very dumb example. If I say something like the Brady Bunch, so the Brady Bunch, by the way, is a family of what it was, 8 or 9 people, for those who don't have any good education about culture.
Who aren't as old as we are.
Yeah, exactly. The uneducated masses. Basically, the Brady Bunch went for a ride in their Corolla, right? Toyota Corolla, small car. And so if I just say that, you're going to say, hey, wait, basically, how's that possible? The 10 people can't fit into a Corolla, right? And you'll instantly think of that, literally in less than a second. And so if you think about that, there's this background knowledge about sort of people, of their size, the cars, how they, in the physics of whether they can all fit in something. And we're able to sort of constantly in our conversations, we have all this background knowledge and assumptions that we're sort of marshaling to sort of make sense of what's going on. And when you try to make a computer understand a sentence like that, you find it actually doesn't have any of that. And it makes you realize for the first time all the assumptions you had. And so I think, and I think a predecessor of that was before computers, making proofs like in math and science and logic, was another example of that basically proofs are computer-like in their stupidity. They're just steps, one step to the other. And I think when you try to see the world through that prism, it's limiting in some ways, but in the other ways, it sort of brings up all of these biases you had, all these assumptions you had. And it's really tremendous, I think, in terms of making you more enlightened and making you more sort of insightful about the world. So I think, in that sense, AI, and if you look at it, if you do it well and you do it sort of earnestly, could be great for people, actually, make us understand the world better.
Do you think that will lead us to do you think that there's one common reality that we're all misobserving, or is there a multitude of realities that we're all experiencing independently?
I think there's one reality, but there's different ways of thinking about it. So what's a good example of that is, I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but you see basically somebody sees a kid fall over, right? Maybe the parent sort of thinks of the pain the kid's having. Maybe a physicist thinks of the actual physics of it, the balance and the gyroscopic forces and so forth. But so there's different sort of aspects of reality. There's different ways of looking at the different models of reality. But I think deep down there actually is something that we can sort of, there is a reality that actually is there that sort of our mental models don't really affect in any way. But it's a lot of work to actually, even when people are really smart and they're really earnest and they're really dedicated and energetic about it, it's hard enough to sort of be right about that. But then on top of that, it's sort of laziness and sort of agendas and sort of emotions and so forth. It's hard to get at that. It's hard to actually be accurate about that. And I think, there is a proper use of sort of not just computers, but just generally sort of more formal, rigorous methods of looking at the world that can help us sort of get more on agreement on stuff. But it sort of depends on people sort of having this sort of motive to see it. I think the problems with people having different perspectives, I don't think they're driven. I mean, there is different people can look at the world in different ways and different backgrounds and sort of different sort of personalities and different sort of ways of thinking can affect that. But I think 95% of the problems we have about sort of people having different ways of looking at the world aren't driven by anything that's inherent. It's driven by the fact that people just are being just sort of distorted by their emotions and by their agendas and so forth. I think if you really put people who are seriously, legitimately earnest, they're not afraid of confronting facts that that are scary to them or unpopular. I think, and are willing to take conclusions to where they to lead, and have the mental energy and intelligence to do that. I think you put all those people together and are really earnest about it, I think you can get a lot more agreement. I think the problem is that almost nobody has all those characteristics.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how can you help me devise like a boot camp to get people up to that level so that they can engage with these conversations in that capacity? Very tough, right?
It's tough. And, I mean, I think that's the problem though. So like, everybody expects sort of, technology in a classroom, for example, to make kids smarter. That's not what it is. To make kids learn better. It's other things. It's your habits. It's your outlook. It's you can have a great education with books and pen and paper. It really, but I think that's the question. I think that's what you just described is somebody needs to figure that out. And that would be, the thing is, let's say somebody did figure that out. My question is, who would actually want that? I don't know how many people really, you say, do you want to be rational? Do you want to be insightful? Do you want to be objective? Sure. Right. But actually, when they see what that means, how many people would really want that? Another example would be, think of like, let's say you invented some class that was really good at this and made kids super enlightened, rational, objective, whatever you want to put it. And then you set up shop next to sort of an SAT prep course, right? Like no one's going to take their kids to this thing. They're all going to take their kids to the SAT prep course. So I'm not trying to dump on the idea. I think it's the most important idea. It is the main, I really do. I believe that. I think it's really one of the most important problems in history and civilization, like not just now, in the past and in the future. But that's the challenge, is getting people to want it. I think if people want something, it happens.
Well, I'm not known for taking on easy tasks. So funny you should say. That's something that we've been really, that's like one of the goals of the liminal order, actually, is to how do you create yourself to become in a state in which you can interpret information, discern what's valuable, make a choice and a commitment, then embody your ideals as it relates to that information. And in my conversations with guys like Jordan Greenhall, who's now going by Jordan Hall, he's a tech guy turned philosopher who's really thinking about this issue quite a bit, and thinking about sense making and cohesion, national cohesion. And you combine that with the stories and the narratives and the power of our shared imagined orders and whatnot, and you can see how social media has really fucked all that up and made it much, much worse. And that we don't have Rosie, it's the postman, you're fine. Rosie, no, my dog. Well, maybe we'll edit that out later, but maybe not. So we have we've lost the shared narratives that held us all together, and social media has really punctuated us into or blasted us into a million pieces instead of one single coherent unit. And one of the things that Jordan's come up with, and this is not brand new information, it's sort of ancient wisdom, is his idea is that you have to become the most finely tuned version of yourself as possible, right? And so that means making sure that you're physically sound and making sure that you're mentally clear. For me and for my guys, that's for meditating, and for through exercise and community service and effort, and realizing that you have to be of service and commitment to other people. And so if you start to stack these things up, it begins to create this sense of personal sovereignty, which allows you to sort of detach from some of the chaos that's out there and detach from the agendas and develop an earnestness and a courage to address some of these issues and have difficult conversations and to accept competing ideas and have people push back against you and not take it personal, and to really just engage in the pursuit of intellectual progress and dialogue. And that's what we're doing right now. And that's what we're doing, you and I are doing right now. And that's what we're doing in liminal order. And that's what I hope for from all our guests, is to be able to sort of put some of that stuff aside and to really think about it. Man, can you imagine how much more popular I would be if all I did all day was throw out red meat and Trump this and that, and and just throw out political sausage for people to fry? I mean, that would bore me to death, absolutely. And so we're going for nuance, and we're going for actual commitment, and we're going for embodiment. And courage, and being able to think about some of these things with courage, I think, is something that's totally missing out there. So when you say the kids won't, your parents won't send you to that school for SAT, they'll choose SAT over that. I'm hoping that guys, as they start to mature in the world and start to sense that the mental models that they've been given, the ways that they're perceiving the data, the systems that they have, they realize that they're stale, they're outdated, they're not returning the positive or productive information or data that you need. And so we need to update those mental models, just like you're saying you need to update sort of the scientific method as it relates to artificial intelligence research, or at least in trying to create bigger leaps forward rather than this boring ass incremental strawberry efficiency bullshit, which I will never forget that example from now on. And so we're trying to get outside of that day-to-day grind. And so I appreciate you coming on to talk about some of these things. I wanted to take one more turn, because this is something that I have personal interest in and I don't know anything about really, but it dovetails off of like computers being able to process reality and to see, like, is this pen here or whatever. Where are you on, and have you even considered simulation theory, an idea that we may be operating within some sort of simulation, that there's some supercomputer advanced civilization far out in the future that has turned us into little technological slaves and ones and zeros, the Rick and Morty scenario? I mean, some of it sounds really far-fetched, but then there's some like actual fundamental arguments that are seemingly very convincing as well too. So I imagine you've given this some thought.
I have. And, I mean, to me, the question I think about a lot, I mean, lots of other people do, is, why is there no sign of life anywhere else? And lots of theories about that. We could be the first, we could be some experiment. It could be that actually this is some transitory, there's like being like a dog, and then there's basically being sort of, there's something that happens after us that's superhuman, that's sort of non-physical, that we don't even know how to observe, right? Maybe we're in this, I don't know. There's lots of theories, but I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what I can do about that. And are we some simulation? I think it's possible. I guess my attitude, and I think about these things, but then I wonder, like, how does it really affect me? What can I do about it? And there's very little I can actually.
No, it's just fun.
So it is fun. It is. Yeah. That's what it is. It's fun. Yeah. It's like watching a football game or something like that.
Indulge me for a minute.
I'll indulge you as much as you want. Yeah.
On the fun side of this. I mean, so one of the fundamental things that I heard that got me thinking was, like, we're on a path, however long that path may take. Computational power and the energy within the universe at some point should be sufficient enough that someone could create a simulation that would be rich enough to confuse the human mind. And if that we're on that path, and that path could take 1,000 years or 10,000 or 100,000 years from now, that the odds of us being the first one on that path are so infinitesimally small that speaking from probability, that we're not the first iteration to come through here. Does that hold any weight for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's my view as well. Like, it's almost inconceivable that we're the first ones. I mean, it's a real puzzle to me. And the only theories I have are, one is, again, these aren't, I think none of these are really my idea, but one is that there's something like all civilizations just inherently self-destruct, right? At some level. That's one theory. The other theory is that they all reach some form of enlightenment where the thing to do is just sit around and like meditate in a cave all day. And so which I don't believe either. I don't think that's really then the other thing is, I'm
starting to feel that way.
Well, it is way more being detached. But the other way is, maybe like somehow like, they all sort of like upload our brains into some kind of like ether of some sort that we don't even really know about, or it's like we're looking at the wrong sort of spectrum of electromagnetic frequency to see where people are. So those are all theories of what could be going on. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's just shocking to me that there's no other signs of life anywhere.
Yeah, that's the one that gets me. And, you go through the Fermi paradox and whatever, but I mean, it's just so big. There's so many places. There's so much possibility, so much opportunity that you would think statistically speaking, it would be probable for us to have at least detected anything out there whatsoever, but it doesn't seem like there is. I mean, have you heard there's been like credible UFO reports? I mean, I haven't dug too much into that. Is that anything that you pay attention to at all?
Like as an amusement, I guess. It seems like probably some secret Air Force project is probably a better explanation for a lot of those things.
Yeah, probably.
I think one other thing to think about, actually, just think about our own history as humans, is that basically technology. It really, I mean, our sort of modern industrial technological sort of society, it happened once. It evolved once, and there were people, and it happened sort of in Western Europe, and is really where it started. And people don't really realize this, but a lot of people don't. But really, Western Europe is like a backwater, right? Like basically through history, civilization started a lot of other elsewhere, and so there is this sort of thing, even in human history, where there's plenty of precedent of people having the mental capability to sort of do everything we're doing now, but they haven't. And they had the culture, they had the time to do it, they had the resources to do it. So then you have to ask yourself, maybe there's really something, maybe it's more rare than it looks, right? But on the other hand, again, there's another billion sort of stars out there, whatever it is, and planets out there. So but anyway, that's the other theory, is that there's really something magically rare about what we're doing, that it's more rare than we would think it would be.
Well, and that's where I'm starting to come down. The more I think about the math and the science and the just nature of infinity, and space and everything that's out there, it seems to me, and I was raised, I'm half Jewish, half Catholic, but I left all of that in childhood. I've not been a practicing religious person as an adult. But I got to say that the more I learn about stuff, the more I am inclined to take to receive an answer that is like beyond science, something super special. I don't know. There's a word that I'm mystical or something. There's a word that I'm missing here.
Right.
But it seems to me that there's just so many questions upon questions upon questions, and you dig down deeper, and there's still just more questions. It gets just more complicated and whatnot. And it seems to me, I don't know, I become more and more open to accepting the presence of some sort of supernatural something or other. I'm not ready to put a face on it or anything, but it does seem to me that it would answer a lot of questions. And I think that is basically been the primary goal over time, really. We're not the first generation of humans to wake up and look up at the sky and be like, oh, I wonder what's out there. We've all had these questions, and we've all felt the urge to have them answered. And so having an answer that worked as a blanket answer for things, I think I can really see the productive value in that. I'm also starting to see the sort of emotional, spiritual value in that as well, too. Which is why some of these conversations about reality, perception of reality, simulation stuff, creating a new human mind out of sand and glass and heat and whatever, all these things are tied together, which makes it so absolutely fascinating, such an interesting field. I know you said you entered AI in the winter time or whatever, but it seems like you're in a really fascinating, exciting realm of our existence today. I mean, what brings it all together quite like that? It's very, very fascinating to me.
It is. Yeah. I mean, a question for you is, have you noticed that, again, so there are these deep questions. Why are we here? What caused everything? And I remember when I was my first, you go to college, there's a bunch of other kids thinking about the same things. I get a sense now, I meet young kids now, both when I was a professor, but also sort of just in normal life now. I don't get a sense that they're asking the same questions. I mean, I almost feel like the curiosity about the deeper questions has actually waned. I don't know if you found that as well or not. I mean, one theory is there's so much just social media, just constant simulation. You don't even have time to think about these things, that it's like a Brave New World or something like that, where you're constantly kept so occupied, you never think about the deep questions.
Yeah, there's definitely information overload. And there's new religion now too, though. So there's new moral codes and new religions that are secular religions that have popped up, that are driving our institutions and our education system, that don't even make space for those kinds of conversations. I think maybe the lack of questioning in that regard could come from feeling like you already have the answer, and the answer is zero, blank, dark, nothing, nihilistic, totally spiritualist, just total fucking random matter in a random place at a random time, and there's no answer.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, that basically that we're becoming sort of almost like this. There's almost like this doctrine that's being imposed on everybody. It's just not what it used to be, and it doesn't really have really space for these kinds of questions.
Yeah, because it's presented as the answer.
Right, right.
Yeah, here's the answer, and they I think from what my sense is on campus and talking to people, studying curricula and things, is that it's not presented in a way that that invites exploration either. Especially the new secular religions, intersectionality, critical theory, things like that. These things are being presented as just fact, question asked, question answered, just move forward. We have to be activists. We have to take care. We have to make change. There's no question for that type of, I'm going to say navel gazing, but
Yeah,
that's pejorative. So, just dreaming, imagining. I mean, dude, how much time did I spend just like poking a stick in the mud when I was a kid,
yeah,
and just playing and just where does your mind go and the things that you think about? I mean, daydreaming used to be something that people look down on daydreaming, but man, daydreaming is where I get most of my good work done. It's like I can be totally lost in my own head and working, even though it looks like I'm just kind of staring off into space. And I'm as a victim of this today as anybody. That phone has fucking got me. I'm like a heroin junkie with the
yeah,
phone, and I have to set really strict parameters in its usage and daytime and limits and stuff, because I can't get deep work done when I'm like doing social media. And it's part of my job and I love it. I love doing it, but it starts a cascade of thought and action reward that is really hard to break out of. If I start off my morning doing social media and I have some tweets like take off, then I can lose another 2 hours just watching like thousands of notifications come in, when really all I wanted to do was set off a couple of tweets and then get back to writing or reading or prepping for an interview or something. So like for me personally, as an adult, I've had to find ways to create space in order to allow my mind to go. And as a writer, luckily I have a system for that too. And as I write, people say you got to think before you write. I'm like, no, man, I write so I can think. And that's when I start to see things come together. But I don't see us really like creating those spaces for our children and for our youth today. And it's this transition period. You and I are approximately the same age. Do you consider yourself Gen X?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Gen X. Okay. So we're part of this transition time where we're all making these mistakes, like, here, give your fucking kid a phone when they're 10. No, I think that's probably a pretty bad idea. Or a number of different mistakes of like how to manage your privacy online or how to just not be an idiot on social media. These are all things I had no idea stuff I was doing when I was 14 online was still going to be out there today.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Like, so we're learning through trial and error through humans, which is
And what you
it's a bummer.
and what you said about sort of like you were a kid, you had time to just poke a stick in the mud, and you can't do that anymore. And I see out here in Silicon Valley, you see all these parents taking their kids. They go to these world class schools, and then afterwards they go to these tutoring centers, and so these kids are so overprogrammed, and they're constantly scheduled all the time. I'm not the first person to say this, but basically that's all they're doing, and they're being turned into the and it's good in some ways, but it's also making them fragile in other ways, and they don't
Yeah.
actually think well, and they don't even have time to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a scary thing where you get sort of this elite we're breeding, where basically it's super sort of intense and concentrated and focused in certain ways, but also completely sort of incapable of thinking about or having curiosity about sort of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it's not really it's not a really good experiment, I don't think.
No, it's not. And we're beginning to see those people raised like that in professional industry now. So like journalism, for example, how many journalists are between ages of 25 and 35 and who grew up in this whole same environment where you don't have any moment to reflect. You're taking everything, you get everything as given as dogma. You really aren't being critical. You've had no time to self-explore other than those like 4 weeks you took in Spain after your study abroad semester or whatever, drinking with other kids from Australia. That doesn't really count. And so we're seeing, I think, sort of that myopic thinking in journalism and then into our discourse. And then that's why in my book I called the college campuses ground zero, patient zero, because that's where it's all starting. And then it just crisscrosses the country, infiltrates our institutions. And then the institutions these days seem to be bending to adopt to the needs of the new people rather than the old days, like forcing the new entrants to adopt to the institutional standards and norms, which I think is also very troubling. In fact, I hadn't put this together now, but yeah, the cult of the child, which has evolved over the last few decades here, where the parents put the needs and wants of the children first, breeds an institutional structure, an organization in which the leadership of those organizations are going to want to put the needs of those childs and new entrants first too, and then they begin to lose track of what their mission was, what their shareholder responsibilities are, etc. And so everybody gets distracted, and now you've got the kids sort of running the insane asylum, even though we raised them to be crazy in the first place. Man, there's a lot in there, but I'm doing my best to not have that happen with my kids. I mean, we have family dinner every night, and I cannot get the kids away from the table. They sit there, no devices, no anything. They sit there, they ask questions, we probe, we talk about all kinds of shit. And now my daughter's in high school, we're following the election and stuff. And she's been her job and she's taking AP government. Her job was to represent Mayor Pete in her class discussions every week. And so it's been really fun to see her process all that stuff. I can't wait to talk to her tonight about what happened in Iowa last night, because we'll release this in a week or two, but last night there was crazy, who knows what's going to even come out of the Iowa caucus. They don't have any results 24 hours later at this point, but it's been an hour and 20 minutes, and I wanted to just wrap up with a couple of other things. I could really rap about this shit with you for forever. This is very fascinating. You're a very interesting guy, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk to me. I know that you started your company, you sold it to Yahoo, you worked for them for a little bit, you went and worked for Samsung, I believe, for a little bit as well.
That's right.
And now you've transitioned into something new. Why don't you tell us about that to the extent that you're able? I'm very interested.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks for asking. The overall, there's this expression, software is eating the world. And what that really means is that the entire economy, all of society at some level is being fueled by software, depends on software. Example would be, the taxi industry now is like Uber. And so there's software underlying that. Airbnb sort of in the hospitality industry. And I could go on, everything, dating,
even dog walking.
I didn't think of that, but I believe it.
It really is. It really is, dude. There's an app now where wherever you are, if you're a dog walker, you just pull it up and there's like 5 people within 50 feet of you that need their dog walked.
Wow.
And you just go and you walk the dog, and they GPS tracks the walk that you did. You take a picture and you upload it, and you don't ever meet the people, but it's dog walking on demand. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Fitbit leash. I was, somebody ought to invent that.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Yeah, that's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. So that's a good Kickstarter project. So software is taking over the world, and so software is required everywhere. But really, the supply of software developers is limited. Contrary to what people say, everybody just can't learn to code. Actually, it's a very sort of small amount of people who are really good at being able to become good coders. And so what you see is that there's a shortage of programmers. The salaries are going super high, which is good if you're a programmer. But what it means is for most projects is that they can't happen because the software for what they want to do doesn't exist. And we talked about that a little bit in relationship to liminal order, but it's everywhere. So our company, and so one other way of talking about it is, if you follow the economics at all or the stock market, historically, when the price of oil or energy goes up, the economy does poorly, because basically profits go down because the cost of making everything sort of increases, and because there's no profit, there's no investment, new things don't happen. It's horrible. I think software is like that too. That basically the fact that software is supposed to produce is a huge sort of wet blanket on the entire on human progress, literally. So our startup's goal is to make software orders of magnitude easier to produce. And so we have a technology that does that. For a certain array of software, we we can make it 1,000 times easier to produce. And that's nice for the reasons I just described. But I also think it's nice for maybe some of the things that your community is interested in as well, which is that if you look at a lot of the dysfunction on the web today, I think a lot of it is driven by this. So, you have 4 or 5 platforms that are really controlling the vast majority of what people see or think and attend to. And the reason you have that, to some extent, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is that it's so expensive to create these platforms that no one can create an alternative. That if you're unhappy with how sort of Facebook or Twitter or anybody's doing stuff, to create your own version of these things is super expensive. And so if you can make software virtually free to create, then you could have alternatives to a lot of these things, and everything will. And I think in a lot of ways, there'll be a lot more diversity in sort of in our tech platforms, and a lot more. It'll be more customized what people want, not sort of driven by top down. And I think the final angle on this is that software is super expensive to produce. Literally, Facebook and Google spend billions of dollars on developers, but at the same time, people want it to be free. And so the way you reconcile that is you charge for advertising. And that sort of gives you an economic incentive to sort of hoard data and control people's data and limit their experience in certain ways, so you can serve ads on our software. So basically, so again, a lot of things that we don't normally think of having to do with sort of economics or programming skills or programming development actually are problems that at least part of their cause is how expensive it is to create software. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing. I guess short term, I mean, we're trying to build sort of, if you have your own social network or your own, collaboration type software you want to create, let us know, or reach out to us. We're happy to sort of see if we can help you in some way.
And that's it's called Dry.io.
Dry.io. That's right. And you just search for that. You'll find us. Just send me. Go ahead.
So what you're saying is that the high cost of software development is basically a drag on human development at this point in time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's enabled huge monopolies to take over our communication platforms, or create and then control them, collect data on us, sell it to the highest bidder, and use us basically in pawns for both their political agendas and in their money-making agendas and whatnot. So basically, we feel like we're free, but we're also kind of trapped. And you in part attribute that to the high cost. This was basically like a huge high barrier to entry in this market, so that it keeps people out and allows these companies to make whatever decisions they want to make. Everybody can just scream and cry about it. Me, for example, I got banned from Twitter for using the word retard, which I also then laughably saw in your piece. You used the word retard, but you used it in exactly the same way I used it, which is to say that it was like limiting function or limiting factor in this person's development, or in this case, software development. And I got banned for 12 hours from that. So I know that I'm like so precariously at their mercy.
Yeah.
They could just on a whim. I mean, I'm already on shadow ban lists. I can already see and feel the algorithmic or manipulation. There's also manual manipulation that goes on within Twitter. We know that to be true. And so, I'm constantly battling an uphill, mix my metaphors, uphill wind in my face, tailwind. I don't know. I'm definitely dealing with issues. And so I'm sort of at their mercy. But what you're saying is you have devised, and I would love to know a little bit more of the how on this, because it sounds like a fantasy, right?
Yeah.
Like, how were you able to create a system that could help people create an array of software, you say, that they're going to be able to build it and customize it and deploy it at a much faster rate, one that would be on par of taking, did you give me this example before, but of taking the price of oil from $10,000 down to $10, and would really pump up all of our outcomes here? Like, yeah. A, do I have that right? And B, how do you do that, sir?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So there's 2 ways of thinking about how we do it. I mean, sort of one is a very high level way of thinking about it, but you could look at sort of what does a computer programmer do, right? They basically have a normal person who's not a programmer say, I want my software to do X, Y, Z, and they say that, say, in English, right, in a natural human language. And then there's the computer which has a computer language where you need to tell it to do stuff. And so what the programmer does in some sense is translate from human language to computer language. And it turns out that something that sort of you and I can talk about, I can describe an app for you in 10 minutes. It would take that same app to actually implement that app in a computer can take literally tens or hundreds of thousands of pages of code. It can take literally person months of effort to do. And so if you could automate that translation process, then you can make programming faster. And so we're not there yet. That would be the ideal. I just talk for 10 minutes and suddenly my software's created. But what we've done is we've created sort of a way of describing software that's sort of a lot simpler, closer to how humans think of software than how computers think of software. That lets you sort of describe your software very simply. And that actually, and we have a way of converting that into actually running software, and that makes things faster.
I think that last part, that's the secret sauce. We have a way of converting that into ways that machines can understand. Does this draw, presumably, on the work that you've started at MIT and then worked on at where were you, at Rensselaer, I think?
That's right.
And then is this part of your career trajectory, or is this an off branch? Is this a U-turn? What is this?
No, it's part of my career trajectory. I guess I developed this theory called the cognitive substrate, and the basic idea there is if you look at we evolved, say, 50 to 200,000 years ago as humans, right? That's when the last sort of major step in human evolution, where we became Homo sapiens sapiens. There hasn't been much that's changed since then. The evolution is much slower than that. So and if you look at what we were doing 200,000 years ago, we were basically running around being, manipulating the physical world, organizing in small groups. And our brains evolved for that. So our brains did not evolve to think about parliaments or elections or stock markets or option prices or just all the things we think, or computers or anything that we think of, most of anything we think about now. So all these sort of billions of things people think about now really must be sort of running on machinery that was built for a small number of things that we cared about 100 or 200,000 years ago. And so figuring out what's that core sort of operating system, or what's the core sort of substrate of mechanisms that sort of enable everything else to sort of happen is sort of what my whole sort of career has been about, sort of identifying what this core is and then implementing it. And so in a sense, what we're doing right now is identifying that core for computer programming, for software, and sort of finding a way to implement that so people can leverage that to sort of write their own software.
Okay.
So let me make it a little bit more concrete. So
define for me. One of my questions I had here was, please define cognitive substrate. I think that I would like that. And then any other further example that you have. I mean, you explain it very well. It's just it's a sort of profound thought. You've been working on this for your career. I'm trying to process it right now. So totally. Work with me.
No, absolutely. So 200,000 years ago, you're wherever people evolved 200,000 years ago. And, what are you doing? Let's say a big part of your brain, say, is evolved for tracking some animal because you're hunting it, right? And so that involves having really good capabilities for, cause sort of memory of where something was, for being able to predict where it's going to be in the next minute. It involves basically being able to recognize objects and separate them from their background. It involves some knowledge of time, like if this happened before that. It involves cause and effect, like if I don't know, if I hit something with a spear, it's gonna like fall down, and therefore I can eat it. So there are these primitive mechanisms: cause and effect, time. Categorization is another one. So categorizing where things are, what things are, and how they behave. And so there are all those sort of mental mechanisms we have for those things. And I'd say there's 10 or 20 of those, whatever they are. And the trick is those evolved just for those narrow circumstances. But whatever we do now to think about stock options or parliaments or whatever, are using just those same 10 mechanisms.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I got that. Okay. So we're woefully ill-equipped to deal with the complexity of the world around us today. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other way of looking at it is we kind of like stuff the world we have around us into that sort of a paradigm. So one example is this, like, here's an example. Like, let's say I'm on a banker of some sort, and I'm taking money and I'm giving it from company A to company B, right? So I'm taking, let's say GM is paying, who makes tires? I forget. Firestone.
Firestone.
Exactly. They're paying Firestone, say $100 million to buy some money. Well, it turns out that so we think of that money as moving from point A to point B. And we use the same part of, even though that money really is just all electronically, might even be, it's nowhere. It's like in the cloud somewhere. It's in some database somewhere. The way we think about it in our head is like X moving from physical location. It's like moving sort of a basketball from court A to court B, right? It's that we use those kinds of same mechanisms to think about sort of more abstract things. Yeah, go ahead.
And how is that applying to your work here with Dry.io?
Sure. So it turns out that there's like 5 or 10 things that you could look at and say those are core processes that happen in all software. So one simple example would be categorization. So if you think of, for example, email, you have folders in email, right? So that's really a way of categorizing your emails, right? If you look at something like Slack, which is a chat channel, a chat system. I know you guys use something else, but I think most people are familiar with Slack.
Sure.
Basically, there's channels, and you can look at channels as another way of just categorizing, categorizing your messages. If I have a channel on in my ski club, and I have a channel on skis, another channel on slopes, or something like that, they're categorizing your messages. If you look at something like folders in sort of your operating system on your computer, those are ways of categorizing files. So this notion of category, a folder, shows up actually everywhere, and in almost all kinds of, and not self-driving cars, but there's a huge amount of software where you have this notion of categorization, and it shows up in different ways. Another example of that is search, right? So you could look at basically your email inbox as just sort of like a search result for showing me showing me all my emails sorted by time, right? You could look at your Facebook stream as sort of another search result, like show me all Facebook posts posted by my friends, sorted by time. And I could go on about other pieces of software like that. So there's these core ideas like search, categorization, and there's a handful of other ones like that actually underlie all of software. And another one is permissioning. So back in nature, a big thing is who controlled what fruit, who was married to whom, who was mating with whom, and who controlled what piece of land. So in data, in software, that kind of access is an important thing that happens a lot too. So email, for example, Facebook's another good example. So classically in Facebook, you can see a message, you have access to it basically if you posted it or if a friend of yours posted it. In Twitter, anybody can see any message, at least on a public feed. In email, you can see a message only if you sent it, you were a sender or a receiver. In Slack, you can see a message only if you're a member of the channel it was in. So there's these sort of, I can describe them in 1 or 2 sentences, these sort of what I would call permission rules. And it turns out to implement them can take hundreds of thousands of pages of code, but I can describe them in 1 or 2 sentences, and they apply to all software. So basically, it turns out if you give me sort of your data model, like what objects do you care about, you give me permission rules, you give me some views of how you want to see it, then a small number of things like that are enough to characterize what all software does. So yeah.
So, but are you? Let's say today, if you want to develop, product X, it takes $100,000. Are you taking like $99,000 worth of work and just doing it all your damn self and having your client do $1,000 worth of work, or are you actually making it so that you only have to do $1,000 worth of work and the client only has to do $1,000 worth of work, and now all of a sudden it only costs $2,000 instead of $100,000? Do you understand? Are you just taking on more responsibility on the front end, or whereas the total amount of labor is still the same, or is your process, you're actually reducing the amount of labor required overall?
Yeah, the amount of labor is reduced overall. Absolutely. So
Wow.
the name of our company is Dry.io, and Dry stands for don't repeat yourself, which is a very common sort of expression for programmers. And it turns out that everybody is always rebuilding the same things. So this permission stuff, everybody's building their own version of it. The search stuff, the folder stuff, and so it'd be great if you could just build it into one platform and everybody can use it. The reason that hasn't happened so far is because it's different for everybody. And so adapting it to everybody's specific needs no one's really known how to do that sort of quickly. And we found a way to do it quickly.
Well, that sounds like the very important part. That's the part you should probably keep under lock and key.
Right.
And it sounds really fascinating to me based on everything that we've talked about. I mean, if we could reduce some of the barriers to entry into these markets, reduce the friction involved in trying to get something new produced, reduce the inter platform headaches and nonsense that I have to deal with sometimes, I can see how that would open up greater efficiencies for more communication and more innovation. Hell, it could even open up greater avenues for empathy and human understanding for other people. So personally, from the perspective of the liminal order, that sounds all very super interesting to us. And I can't wait to see how you guys move along. Like where would you consider you got yourselves in the process in terms of creating a new product and a new company?
We have a prototype, and we're gradually in a position now. We're on a cusp of moving it to something from a prototype to something people can use. So we're starting to look for early users, basically early people who have a community, say like yours, who might want to develop special software for it. And very common use cases would be you have your own social network you want to build, your own sort of messaging platform, your own forums. So anything like that, we're happy to sort of talk to people and sort of make them test cases. So build something for them and use them to make the software better. Yeah.
Well, I would very much like for liminal order to be a test case. I know we've talked about that, and I look forward to having opportunity to explore there. Anybody else who might be interested, reach out to Nick at dry.io. And Nick, thank you so very much for all of this. It's been wonderful conversation. I know I learned a ton, and I hope and I know that the rest of the guys in the audience are definitely going to appreciate this conversation as well. Understanding the world today is very complicated, but understanding computing and technology and artificial intelligence is certainly one of the areas in which you have to have at least some basic understanding to see what's going on around you and why and what the roadblocks and bottlenecks are and implications are for the future and whatnot. So thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I really sincerely appreciate it. And, hopefully we can have a chance to do this again sometime soon. Is there any place in particular where the guys, like, are you present on social media, or do you have any sort of contact out there besides Dry.io, or is that like the best place to get you?
Yeah, Dry. Find me on LinkedIn. That's honestly a place you just directly message me there. You could follow us at Dry.io. That's our. Let me honestly, I don't even know what my Twitter handle is, to tell you the truth. Right now, we use it so frequently.
I'll stick it in the show notes.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem at all. But the website is definitely dry.io.
Yeah.
And you can look up Nick on LinkedIn as well too. But again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you some more. And man, thanks a lot. And let's do it again.
Likewise, Jack. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.